Good morning, everyone. Hemshech Ayin Beis. We finished the paragraph on page 1199 in volume 2 of Ayin Beis. For those that want to follow the text, just go to ayinbeis.com and you have the text uploaded there, PDF. You can access, download, view. So to sum up what we learned yesterday was the second half of the phrase in Sefer Yetzirah. The Sefer Yetzirah says, Havein b'chochma, v'chochem b'binah. In other words, in addition to the fact that there's chochma and binah, two faculties, the first two of the three cognitive faculties, chochma being consisting of several elements. Briefly, two key elements. One, that it's something that captures the truth of a higher reality. So it's the emes of something. And it's misamis. It resonates and is clear and crystal clear in the level of Riyah, Chochma. Binah being, in contrast, the understanding of an idea and the comprehension, Ayin and Yesh. Chochma has a second aspect, the Sichli Sheba Chochma. How Chochma begins the process also of the Seichel, not just the resonating truth that's in the flash, but the beginning of the explanation and ultimately explained at length in Binah. So the Sefer Yetzirah is adding that each one has the other within it. And the Rebbe Rashab explained that. Havein b'chochma we learned first, the bottom of last page 1198 through the top of page 1199, explaining that how everything that will become in Binah is rooted, its shadish is already in a form of hiyuli, in a form of a barak hamavrik, in the flash of the idea. The words he uses, that b'chochma is skalas habina, that he gave the example of the person. First, he has the flash of an idea that's beyond explanation. A moment later, he can explain it to himself and to others, and that is level of bina. But it's all rooted. I just wanted to see the exact words how we use there. Actually, let me correct myself. He didn't say, one second. Yeah, the Hasbara Vasechel is still in the state of Yuli, and that's the level of the Barak HaMavrik, the flash, and it's called Yesei Daba. But then a moment later, you begin to explain. So even the explanation, even though it's not there yet, the very fact that you could explain, that the Frierdiker Rebbe explains in Tofresh Pei Beis explicitly, and even the Binah, the full-blown Binah, is all rooted in the Nekudas HaChochma, though it's completely concealed. Okay. And that's the point, the lower point of the Yud. And as he explained, as it emerges, it also is a state of concealment. As soon as something is subject to explanation, it doesn't have quite the same intensity of the clarity of the behir of what is there in the Chochma. Good. So that's Havein v'Chochma. What's Chochma b'Binah? So Chochma b'Binah is the following: that even once you're in the state of complete hasaga, you're going through details and expansive understanding. Chochma is embedded in there in a form of a Synopsis. We'll explain that in a minute. And Chochma is there, and he said really two things. First of all, as a reality check, to keep you on course, to keep the Binah from going off and wandering off course. B'derech haklasan is the word he used. So when he's understanding it in that whole expansion, it should make sure that you're mechuvan to them, as you call teichen hamechuvan, the proper focus of the initial idea, and also that when you come to the conclusion, after all the details, the nekudas hatamsis, what he calls the synopsis, the summary, that comes at the end of the whole process of arichas hasaga, miskarev el etzem ha'inyan k'vei b'tchilas haskalah. In other words, it comes back to and it finishes the circle. It's not off somewhere else. It's not like you moved on into understanding. You bring it back to the initial point, the miskarev, to the nekudas haskalah, as it was when he first conceived the idea in the first flash of Chochma. So the end point and the first point are now have a relationship. And yet, even though it's not the Gili Atzmi, the way it is in the Nekudas Haskalah. But like we said, it does go down a level. Because there, the Etzmin Kameshul Lamayla Masaga, Mashenka Nekudas Hatam Sabar Achar Asaga. So even though it's connected, even though it's on a lower level, and he says, Zeis Vade, you can't compare the Chochma within Binah to the Chochma within itself. Nevertheless, it's a dugma. I'm using these words. The dugma kamei benekudas haskola shemiskarav el etzme inyan be'ena reich mikamei ba'hasaga se'inyan. Nevertheless, it's not like it was in the throes in the middle of the hasaga. There, you didn't yet have that connection to the first initial point. Whereas in the tamsis, you do have it. There, it's more concealed. But we're in the tamsis, in the summary, it connects. And now he makes the distinction that adrab, in a certain way, there's more clarity at the end of the process than there is in the beginning. There's more intensity and more quality. The words he used, the adrab, he says, in the Kudas Haskalah is the ribi ha'oyer v'dakas ha'oyer, the reichkeit, the richness, the full quality. There's something there in the beginning that is only that type of clarity you only have in the beginning, but it's not a clarity, as I explained yesterday, necessary completely on the level of the recipient. It's the person who's conceived the idea has some type of moment of truth that's unique to Chochma. And that because it's because it's closer to the core essence of the idea as it originated from Makar HaSeichel, from Keser, from the levels of Chochma Stemah, of the superconscious. However, a certain clarity of the sight of the light is there in the summary in increased fashion. I explained this. I'm not going to go over it again. What I will do is we should learn this in Tafresh Pei Beis, because the Frierdiker Rebbe says it and elaborates. So as we've been doing with the other pieces, instead of waiting till we finish, I suggest what I'm going to do now in a moment is learn this in Tafresh Pei Beis, so we'll hear it again, but with additional clarification. Then finally, in the parentheses, the Rebbe Rashab qualified and explained, as the Tzemach Tzedek does, so why is the first Chavim B'Chochma called Hiskalulus and Chachim B'Bina called Synopsis? So he says like this, that when you're talking about how Binah was in Chochma, Binah is not active there. Binah within Chochma means that in the root of Chochma, in the earliest stage, you already have in the seed the capacity to ultimately explain it. First explain the idea, just a very flash of the idea, and then explain it fully in Binah. So Binah is not an active force. In the words that are used here, he says like this. Because what's there is the flash of the idea, and yes, the Chochma already has the capacity to bring it into Hasaga, which will come stage 2, as he said, either a moment later or when you've developed it further. Frierdiker Rebbe's words were that it has the alulius in Chochma, the potential to be explained, which is vital, because if it didn't have the potential, then Chochma and Binah would fundamentally always be two separate entities. You want to have that Chochma, even in its flash, even in its earliest stages, has the capacity to ultimately be explained, but the explanation is a descent and a helam. So bottom line is, the way Binah is in Havein B'Chochma, it's in a form of Iskalulus because it's Batal L'Gab Chochma. But how about how Chochma is within Binah? When Chochma is active within Binah, it's not just a potential Chochma that's there. It's active. Binah is obviously the dominant feature because you're understanding the idea. But beneath the surface, within the idea, you have a guide that's constantly like a reality check that is like think of it like a referee in a way, that's making sure that you're sticking to the parameters of the goal. So the effect of when you say Chacham, you say Binah Chacham B'Binah, it's not just a potential and it's completely sublimated. It's not. It's an active reality check that's making sure you stay on course and making sure that Binah will be guided toward the proper destination. So Binah is obviously the dominant force at work. But the Chacham B'Binah, the focus there is on the Chacham and the Binah. So you basically have two things happening. You're understanding the idea, and then you have a Chacham B'Binah, and that Chacham B'Binah is keeping Binah, as he said, to use Hua Iker, Raksha Maslabesh is Bebina, Shaharia Iker Kanu Anakuda, Raksha Maslabesh Binah, Shinakuda Haba Min Asagi. Now, this should not be mistaken to say that Chochma is taking over Binah. Binah is the effective force here. Remember, there's Chochma and Binah as two separate entities. Then there's a new addition that the Sefer Yetzirah says, Chochem bebina. What is dominant in Chochem bebina is the Chochem, not the Binah. But Binah is definitely the stage that we're in right now. So within Binah, there's a Chochem within Binah that is keeping that making sure that the Hasaga is aligned toward the Nekuda. And ultimately, like he says here, in the context of Nekuda, the Nekuda Satamsis, what's the Iker? The Iker there is the Chacham and Binah making sure that the Nekuda Satamsis, the summary of the whole lengthy and elaborate and expansive explanation, is aligned with the original point. So that's a very different type of relationship that Chochma has with Binah than Binah has with Chochma when it's Binah Havein be Chochma. Okay. So I would now read the Tafresh Pei Beis, where he talks all about this, a little more at length, just help us understand it better. And then I'll stop for questions because we right now the same subject, maybe there'll be more explanation that will help us. If you have the Tafresh Pei Beis, which was posted on the group, I'm looking right now at page, I'm going to read page 324 in Tafresh Pei Beis. So after explaining Havein b'Chochma, which we reviewed, he says v'Chochem b'Binah. It's a new paragraph there. He says like this: v'Chochem b'Binah hu da'acha shemevin u'masig es ha'inyan heitev b'protei ha'inyan. So keep in mind, this is the Ayin Beis with the Frierdiker Rebbe's explanation. So it's almost word for word with additions. That after he understands and comprehends the idea well, the Protei Inyan with all the details, in the details of the Inyan, I should say, Yushmar Etzlei, Tamsis Techen HaKavana. The Chochem Bebina indicates that after he understands and comprehends well the subject, what's preserved within him is the summary of the Techen HaKavana. In other words, as he's going to explain, Hainu, Techen HaMechuven B'Hasagazu. The content, the intended objective or the intended purpose or content in this comprehension. What was the point in the first place? So in other words, Binah, without the guidance, without this element of Chacham Bebina, can lose sight of what's the purpose, what's the point in all of this. Like you hear very often, you hear a conversation, someone said, what's your point? You can have people talking for hours or hour. So what's the point? You actually say the word point. In other words, you're looking for where are you going with this and where's it coming from? So that's what Chochma Bebina does. Asher teichen v'tamtze zeh yishmer eiseh b'chol inyan ha'israchvus. This teichen, this content, this summary should be preserved by him, by the person who's comprehending the idea, b'chol inyan ha'israchvus. In the entire expanse of the comprehension of the idea should be preserved the integrity of this nekuda. So he continues to explain. And you see here right now that it's more elaborate than it is in Ayin Beis. The ikara hasoga who bisachvus is pastus gdela, because the primary comprehension of something is not in the nekuda. The nekuda is the kernel of truth, the point of it all. But hasoga in its full glory, the primary idea of comprehending something, is expressed and seen in expansiveness, in isachvus bispastus, in expansion and an extension. Gdela, in a great expansion and extension. That's when somebody explains an idea well. The explanation of the idea is not 2 minutes, It's in the sense, it's not two words, it's an expansive. The Nekudas HaChochma could be one word. You could say, for example, Nekudas HaChochma is the idea, let's say, of Chochma itself. That's one word, one thought. When I say I don't mean by a word, I mean it's one concept in a very concentrated form. Once you start explaining what Chochma means, you're basically using Binah to explain the idea, and it's an expansive type of situation, explanation. So, since the Ikar Asog is this expansion, so the Chacham Bebina, this is what it does. Oz HaTeichen Yishmer Eisei Shelo Yelech B'derech HaKlos Ba'inyan Ahu Ma'akavona HaMitis V'Apnim Yishabay. So, within this whole expansive state, with the full details and explanations and expansion, extension, and so on, the Teichen, which is he's referring to the Teichen HaMechuvan, which is the Chacham Bebina, is ensuring and preserving. You shouldn't go off b'derech haklosim, which means in some crazy, crooked way that's off course, off the reservation.
Akalosin.
Akalosin. Hahu ma'kavona hamitis v'apnim yishabay. From the true and inner intention of what the whole hasaga, the whole comprehension is all about. So here clearly, just as the Rebbe Rashab said it briefly, it comes the second point. So it's one thing is throughout the comprehension that you're keeping, it's being preserved, the nekuda, that you know what you're talking about and what your main intention is. When we learn Gemara, for example, so they taught us that when you learn the Gemara, you should always have the Mishnah near you. So the Mishnah could be a few pages earlier. And always look at the Mishnah as you're learning the Gemara, because the Gemara would quotes a piece of the Mishnah. Let's say a Mishnah of 5 lines or 10 lines. The Gemara then takes and dissects it, takes one line of the Mishnah, and begins to explain it. So the importance of following the Mishnah as you read the Gemara is vital, because the Gemara can go off in all kinds of directions, and you always want to know what part of the Mishnah is it explaining. Same thing when you learn Rashi. As a matter of fact, Rashi is written in a way that you're supposed to read it together with the Chumash or the Gemara. Rashi writes it like an interwoven commentary. So following what Rashi is commenting on allows you to keep on always checking and making sure that the hasaga, the idea that's being explained, is aligned with what you're explaining. So that's that. The second thing is, in the words of the Rebbe Rashab that we learned, he used the words v'gam. The Rebbe Rashab said v'gam. The Frierdiker Rebbe makes it even more emphasis that it's an additional point. After he understands the idea in a good and detailed comprehension, he's able to come to and arrive at the nekuda v'tamtzis, the point, the summary and summation and synopsis of the inyan. Kalemer eichu mevenu masig etzem inyan ahu acher kol hariches v'yispashtus hamaruba. How he understands and comprehends the etzem inyan, the core idea, after all the length and the increased expansion of the idea. So in other words, point one is that while you're in the middle of the asrachvus, there's that reality check. And point two, that you can come to a conclusion that it's aligned, like he's going to say, Ashazeh v'dos. Not sure why he needs to add the Yiddish, but he says Ashazeh v'dos. This ability that Chacham Bebina does, that you can come to that tamsis, that summary and summation, maybe his chachus. This is an addition that's not in Ayin Beis. Will bring, maybe it brings him to a chachus. Something new is happening here. The Rebbe Rashab sufficed by saying that it keeps the idea true to its integrity and its bottom line, and that it comes to the tamsis that you have that summation. But the Frierdiker Rebbe adds the word hischachus, something new. what he's going to be saying is the newness is that hasaga on its own doesn't have this. Comprehension on its own actually conceals and has the ability to conceal the integrity of the pure, a flash of pure point of the truth of the idea. So the fact that Chochma B'Bina comes into play actually creates a Chassidus that hasaga does not have on its own. But it's interesting that he uses the word Chassidus. It's like a real contribution, or something new happens here in the process of understanding something. So here's what he says. For who? This chiddush is that the hasaga on its own, yes, expands on the idea, develops it, fleshes it out in all the details that as we explained. But now something new is happening. This understanding, this whole israchvus, is now being directed el etzem ayin, like we read, miskarav el etzem ayin. It's now being essentially focused and harnessed toward the core idea. So the Binah, with all its milas, is coming to the miskarav, to the core idea, or kamoy b'tchilas haskala, as it was in the beginning when you first conceived the idea before it entered into Binah. The kasher maskal sa'inyan mimikere. When he first conceived of the idea mimikere from its source in the superconscious, higher than Chochma, shehu mokar haseichel, which is the source for seichel. Hari miskarav el etzem ha'inyan. Now Binah, at the end of the process, is coming closer, even though it moved away, because it moved from the nekuda to the ispashtus, the yud to the hay, from the mayon, which is the spring of water, the well, the living well, to a river. The river is now an expanded river. Does the river go back to its source? So he says, yes, in Chochma Bina it does. That's what Chacham B'Bina does. Chacham B'Bina does that. What does it do? So hasaga alone absolutely explains the idea. But now it's coming that the idea is coming, is shining, is clear, is crystallizing, increasingly by him, to the point that it's as if he sees it mamish. So in other words, the Riyah of Chochma has impacted it through the Chacham B'Bina or Chacham B'Bina to come to a point of clarity, similar to the clarity in the original. Obviously, there's a difference as we're going to learn, but it's a chiddush l'gaba hasaga itself, because hasaga Bina is shmiya, Bina is not Riyah. But the Chacham B'Bina that the Sefer Yetzirah says introduces the Riyah of Chochma into Bina. So the Frierdiker Rebbe is spelling it out even more than the Rebbe Rash, even though this is clearly the kavanah intention of Ayin Beis, but it's, you hear it with more elaboration. It gives you more of a sense of security and resonance. So in other words, as it was in the beginning, now too, meaning at the end of the hasaga, so too now, when you come to the end of the process, you have through the nekudas hatamtzis that Chacham B'Bina creates, you now have that type of clarity. Okay. The footnote just gives more Maamar Mekamis about nekudas hatamtzis. Now he continues. Then now comes the Hagam. The Rebbe Rashab's lashon was not Hagam, he wrote Ima Yesh, I think. Ima Yesh she'enei. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says V'Hagam. And though this is the qualification, and though Bina at the end of the day is not Chochma, like he says now, V'Hagam. The Einei Tzir Atzmi Kol Kach, exactly the language like Ayin Beis, that though in Bina, even in the Tamsis, even in the summary, it's not Etzem Ha'ir as much Kol Kach. Kamoy Shehu b'nekudas haskala. You don't have the Etzem Ha'ir as it was in the beginning of the process when the flash entered, that bridge between the superconscious to the conscious of Chochma, that flash, Barak HaMavrik. So this is not etzem kol kach that much. It's interesting. Kol kach means something, yes, but not as much as it is in Chochma. So there's a difference. Ukanal to benekudas haskola ariboil etzaminyan echshu lamayla min hasech. As we spoke earlier, we discussed earlier, that ben chochma you come to the etzem, and that's lamayla min hasech. Remember there he said it's not a sichli, it's not about comprehension, it's about sensing something true, something greater than just seichel, the truth of something. The zehu inyan haskola. That's the inyan of haskola, which is another word for chochma, for the conception of the idea in chochma. That the seichel is grasping something greater than itself. Remember, chochma senses the truth. There's nothing, he alone, but no one and no one else. Chochma is sensing more than just a comprehension, but a higher truth. In truth, like this is exactly the words that the Rebbe Rashab said, that in truth, it's certainly, you can't compare Chochma, Nekudas Haskola, which is that Nekuda, that concentrated point of a conception, L'v'chacham bebina, or L'chacham bebina, Nekudas Atamtzis. Here he says clearly it's Nekudas Atamtzis. In other words, you can't compare the way it is, the original flash, to Chacham bebina, even though Chacham bebina gives Bina the capacity to experience some of it to some extent, but you still can't compare the two. So bottom line is that we have now a distinction. Umakom makem, both in Ayin Beis, he says, Umakom, nevertheless, had it been Nekudas Hatamtzis, he bedugma, the Nekudas Hatamtzis, the end conclusion and summary and synopsis is bedugma, is like an example of the commercial benekudas haskola. So there's a qualification. They're not exactly the same, but it's a taste of it. It's an example of it. It's similar to. Bezeh, in what and where is that manifest? By the fact that it's getting closer to the etzem. More than when you had in the middle of the journey, in middle of Binah, in the process of expanding and elaborating and discussing. Because when you're involved in the understanding of it, the etzem gets concealed. Like we said, when you're experiencing the riyah of Chochma, the explanation is going to be somewhat a descent and is not going to be able to fully capture the magic and the magnitude of the experience that one sees, that awe and all that comes with the riyah that one sees. So Hasoga alone is a concealer on that. It explains it. It brings it into words, but at the same time, there's an element of concealment. What now is happening is the Chiddush he called, Chacham B'Bina is introducing into Bina that instead of being Misalim alone, it brings it back as much as possible. Not all the way, as he said, it's not the same level, but he brings it back. In the Nekudas Hatamtzim, in contrast to Misalim, it's not concealing, it's bringing back the whole Hasaga to that initial point of what was the whole point of the whole idea in the first place. So it brings a clarity. So if you only had Chochma, and Bina, and you didn't have Chacham B'Bina, you would have a comprehension of the whatever the experience we're talking about, but you would not have it bring it back miskarev to the etzem of it as much as possible. Still a dogma, it's not on the same magnitude, but you have definitely introduced something that Hasaga itself would not have on its own. And that is a resonating truth of the nekuda of the idea. But of course, now he's going to say the adarabah. The adarabah. So now 2 points we're going to still learn. That on the contrary, there's an advantage in Nekudas Hatamtzis over Nekudas Haskola. The end point to the beginning point is an advantage, and there's something in each one that the other one does not have. So he's going to explain that now, which will be learned in Ayin Beis, but this is the Rebbe Friedrich Rebbe elaborate. Adarabah, ha'oir boyer hu b'Nekudas Hatamtzim gam yeser m'k'mo shehu gam b'Nekudas Haskola. That the oil boyer in the Nekudas Hatamtzim, the light is shining and illuminating in this summary, in the end point, also more than the way it was in the initial departure point, the beginning point of Nekudas HaSkola. Nekudas HaSkola again is Chochma, the flash of Chochma. Nekudas HaTamtzis is the end of the process. And so he's saying it's more bohir, more illuminated, more clarity, more crystallized. The Zehu HaHefresh bein Nekudas HaSkola and Nekudas HaTamtzis. Because this is the difference between the Nekudas HaSkola, the point that comes from the initial conceiving of the idea, and the summary of the point at the end of the idea. So you have 2 points here, beginning and end, with the Binah in between. And of course, the different levels of Chochma. So this is the difference between them. The Riboy Ha'oyer, the Dakus Ha'er, the Riboy Ha'er, which he means here, Riboy, I don't think he just means quantity, he means Riboy quality, the magnitude. But definitely the intensity, the power of the Eir. The Dakus Ha'er. So again, Dakus Ha'er, usually we take Dakus as subtle. The subtlety, the nuance, but he says no, the Reichkeit von dem Inyan. He adds the word von dem Inyan. The Friedrich Rebbe Rashav just said the Reichkeit. The Reichkeit, the richness. In other words, not just the idea, the richness of it. It's very essential quality of what the idea is conveying. You know, when a person has that tainug, that pleasure when you think of a solution to a problem, and that first flash of the solution, there's something far more than just a comprehensive essay on the topic. It's a very qualitative and a very high, rich level of understanding, of appreciating something, I should say. So that element, Riboy Eir and Dakus Eir, he calls the Reichkeit, who benekudas ha'askola yesem b'nekemoi benekudas ha'tamtzis. It's more in the initial first point of the conceiving of the idea in Chochma than it is in the end point, in the summary point. Why? Lefisha nekudas ha'askola hi bekirav ela etzem yeser. Because Chochma is closer to the core. It's right out of the mouth of the well. It's like standing right at the source of where wisdom, intelligence comes from. And Chochma is a drop from that core essence. So it's pure, undiluted, completely as close as possible to the source. And that's why it has that intensity more. And the Friedrich Rebbe now adds, Ukanal, the kasher atzmi bobis chalkos. When an etzem comes into distinction, into division, when you break it down, hu bob ribu yeser. So an atzmi comes into expression, it comes with a ribu yeser, with an intense flow. So since atzmi, which is what? Where the mokra chochma is coming into chochma, it comes ribu yeser. But ribu here again doesn't mean like a river. Ribu here means in intensity and in its quality, magnitude. That's the qualification. That with all its ischalkus, meaning as it comes into a specific idea or ideas, even beribui, it's all in the state of pshitus. It does not yet have shape and form. The seamlessness of the core essence of the idea, that's called dakus ha'er. What he called before reichkeit, dakus ha'er. In Ranat, in the Cholzu, Tofresh Nun Tes that I quoted yesterday, he explains that Chochma is compared to Mayim. Mayim is very fluid. And therefore, it's still in the state of not yet being shaped. When Chochma is still in its Nakuda, it doesn't yet have the shape and form that Binah will give it. It's a very pure form that can actually be explained in many different ways and developed in many different ways. So this is all what is the Nekudas HaSkola at its source. So it has that intensity and it has that pshitus, which is not about the details of the idea, but its qualitative message. What is it? What is its message? In this case, it would be Chochma is telling us about the truth of godliness, about a higher truth. But the same is true. The Chochma within Lahavdil physics would be what is the ultimate the ultimate experience you're having when that Nakuda, that conception takes place. Aval Behira Sa'ir. Now we contrast it, but Behira Sa'ir. Behirus is not the word for intensity and not the word for quality or for richness or for seamlessness, pshitus, shapelessness. Behirus is clarity, the clarity of the idea, of the oyer in the idea. Hu benekudas hatamtzis yeser is more in the summary, mikamay benekudas haskola, than it is in the core original flash of the idea. Liyese ba acher hasaga hagmura. Why is that the case? So here the Frierdiker Rebbe, everything going here is the Frierdiker Rebbe's explanation. The Rebbe Rashab just said Behirus Yeser. I explained it yesterday, as I used myself as an example when we wrote the Sikh of, I used the example of Simchus Torah Mem Zayin, but the same example can be used in many different areas. So, yeah. So the Frierdiker Rebbe is going to add, why is it more clarified? Why is it more behirus, clarity at the end of the process? So he says, as I said, the Rebbe Rashab stops here. He goes to the parentheses. Frierdiker Rebbe adds, we
don't have any more. I think that's the last page you posted.
I posted all the pages, I believe.
Oh, this is the last one you posted, I think.
Okay, so then you'll have to just listen to what I'm going to say. Okay. So I posted till the end of a few more pages. Check it out.
I wasn't sure how far you're going to go. Okay.
No, I know I posted because the subject goes all the way till page 328.
You could find it in the Chabad library.
Fine.
Maybe it is here. I'm checking. Maybe I'm wrong.
So he says, why is it more clear at the end of the process than the beginning? Because it comes after Hasaga Gemura, the complete comprehension of the idea. Because remember, it's coming after Binah. After Binah developed and expanded and extended the idea in all directions and understood it in every possible way. Asher Hamuva Mezehu. So here, interestingly, the Frierdiker Rebbe is going to connect the parentheses to understanding this. When we read it in Ayin Beis, the parentheses look like a separate point. Why this is his scholus and this is his slapshus. The Frierdiker Rebbe is going to connect the Frierdiker Rebbe Rashab's parentheses to explain why there's more behirus why the advantage that each one of them has. Chochma, the Nekudas HaSkola and the Nekudah HaTamsis. So here's what he says. Did you find it there? Okay.
No, that you posted 7 pages, and Leosobo was the last word of the last 7th page that you posted.
Okay, so you'll find it later. There's places to find it. Okay. Asher Hamuvan Mizeh. So what do we understand and derive from this? The Havein b'Chochma Shukoyach HaBinah Kolol b'Chochma, that the Binah that is in the power of Binah, the faculty or power of Binah that's encompassed in Chochma, hu behelam, is concealed. And it's a state of sublimation in comparison to Chochma. And that's why it's not discernible there. As we spoke before, that it's not discernible because it's not yet active. It's the potential to understand something that exists in the Nekudas HaChochma. That's the Havein v'Chochma. Aval b'Chochma b'Bina, but when you talk about Chochma within Bina, shehu koyach HaChochma mislabish ba'Bina. That's how the power of Chochma and its uniqueness manifests inside of Bina. Im shu b'chinas slapshus, even though it manifests within Bina, meaning it's not remaining apart and aloof and distant, it actively affects and it manifests and clothes itself within Bina. Within all the details of Bina, you have this reality check of what Chochma is, keeping it aligned toward the mechuvan, to the objective. So even though it's a slapshus, but the ikar is the nekuda of Chochma. So yes, it's mislabish and Binah, but the Chochma within Binah, Chochma remains a primary force there. The bislapshus zeis hamalubish, moishel v'shelet ala lavush. In this form of enclothing, we learned earlier in Ayin Beis, there's different ways something gets enclosed in something. You can dress up in something, and the garment has more impact on the one that's dressed up in the garment. So the malubish, the malubish, the malbish rather, the person who's dressed up is more concealed by the thing that dresses it up. The garment is therefore more dominant. You could have the opposite, that the garment is only a garment, and what's dominant is the one that's enclosed in it. Like when a king wears a royal garment, the royal garment only enhances and expresses the kingship and his majesty. If he would dress, for example, in peasant's garments to conceal himself, to be able to camouflage himself and immerse himself among his subjects, which we know many times the mishalim for that, the examples for that. There, the garment actually is the dominant force. So here he says, this is slapshus of Chochma within Binah, hamalubish meishel v'shelet al lavush. Hamalubish, the one that is getting dressed in, governs and controls and rules over the garment, over Binah, because Chochma is keeping Binah aligned to where it should be. The primary thing is the Nakuda of Chochma. That's the primary driving force of the idea. The only thing is, it manifests in Binah, because Binah is the expansiveness of the idea. So Binah is there in a very prominent way, but there's a driving force that's preserving the integrity, as we discussed. And this is the teisvus maila, the additional quality that comprehension contributes in compared to Askala and compared to the conception of an idea. The Baskola huribu v'dakus oir, like we said, in the conception of the idea and the point of that's conceived, you have the ribu v'dakus oir. The ribu, we said, the intensity, the magnitude, and dakus oir, which he said now, reichkeit and pshitus. You know, similar to when the conception of a seed of a child, that first, at the moment of conception, there's something there that is as close to the source as possible. The end of the process, when the child will be developed, yes, will be aligned with the purpose of why there was a conception in the first place, but there's something about the concentrated first point that has this ribu v'dakus eir. Aval eina boyer kol kach, but it's not that crystallized. Like it is at the end of the process, after you went through an understanding, and now you had the understanding, and you have also the Maila of Chochma within Binah. Then you also have because now you have both qualities. You have the quality of, and let's wait till we finish, and then we're going to stop for questions or comments. So you have the quality of Binah, but it also has within it the Chochma. So there's a clarity that comes at the end, as I explained yesterday, with some examples. And therefore, this is the Rebbe Friedrich Rebbe adding, Rebbe Rashab doesn't even hint to this, but Friedrich Rebbe is adding explanation. And that's why the Askola is possible that it should quickly dissipate, should be quickly forgotten, because it doesn't have yet substance that Asoga has. Mashenken Asoga, Shu Zeichra Ba'arichus Man Yeser. Asoga, because remember, Chochma is just a flash. And a flash has in its tremendous intensity and clarity in some ways, but it doesn't have anything to hold on to. It can easily dissipate or disappear. Mashengen Asoga, which he remembers, Ba'arichus Man Yeser, with a far longer time, because Asoga by definition means you're developing it, you have to understand it, you have to immerse yourself in it, you invest in it, you have to really spend time over it. So therefore, it has substance that the Nakuda of Chochma does not have. So Chochma has Ayin, but Binah has Yesh, and Yesh is substance. This is even Binah without Chochma and Binah. Ubefrat hasoga haba b'slapshus nekudas haskala. And specifically, Binah hasoga, comprehension, that comes b'slapshus nekudas haskala. That comes enclosed within that hasoga, the nekudas haskala, which preserves the integrity of the original point. But now he's introduced the mila of Binah, that Binah has something that adds understanding to it, so it adds clarity. But specifically, when you include Chochma within the Binah, it has a behirus, a clarity that you don't have when you have an initial point. And I explained to you yesterday that once you had Chochma, and then you go through all the process of trying to understand it, and you internalize it with the full comprehension of Binah, and then you come based on the Chochma within Binah to make sure it's aligned with the initial intensity and quality and reichkeit and the richness of what Chochma first introduced, then you have a certain clarity that you don't have on the terms of the Gavra, at least. As I said, I think it's like Chefza and Gavra. If you're talking about the Chefza of the idea, Chochma has far more power in it. But if you're talking about how we experience it, a clarity that's achieved at the end of the process, where you do not lose sight of the Kavana, you have the Chochma within Binah. So it doesn't have the Etzem as much as Chochma does, but it has a Behirus, he says, a clarity that is even greater than the one that was there in the initial point. So the Frierdiker Rebbe explained this piece in this fashion. And then we're going to go back now to Ayin Beis, obviously, but I'm going to pause now. If anybody wants to ask any questions or any comments, please
Just
do
the
so.
point is, it comes out very clear. The clarity is stronger when you have the Chochma in Binah, but the Reichkeit, the Pshita,
Yeah.
and you said it, if you have the Chochma, then you have the Binah and the clarity, then it's you have both minus.
Anybody have any questions they'd like to ask or anything you want to say? No? Okay.
Yeah, it sounds like the explanation, so to speak, is enclosed in the Chochma, and it sort of expands the Chochma, and that keeps the light. It sounds like the Binah improves the Chochma, the Nekudas Chochma. Is that a possible way to explain it?
What are you adding to what we said? I'm not sure.
Okay. It sounds like the explanation of the explanation really is added to the Chochma to give, and the Chochma keeps its original lichtigkeit, doesn't lose it. The fact that it's a lichtige thing, the Saga adds to that lichtigkeit. The Hasaga adds to it, gives it a new flavor, so to speak. But the Hasaga is improving the Chochma.
That's not exactly what he's saying. What he's saying is that the Nekudas HaTamtsis, not the Hasaga, the Nekudas HaTamtsis, he says, meaning the Nekuda, the Chochma and Binah, because it comes after the Binah, has a clarity over the Nekudas HaSkala. He doesn't say the Hasaga has a clarity over Nekudas HaSkala. He's saying the Nekudas HaTamtsis has a clarity over the Nekudas HaSkala.
Yes, okay.
Which is
That's
simple.
what I was trying to say.
I explained yesterday what that means.
Okay.
Because the Hasaga itself, if you stop with the comprehension itself, you don't necessarily have any clarity. You could actually be completely off base. You could have wandered off the reservation and be completely off. It's the end process where you have that, where you have the Nekudas HaTamtsis that Chochma introduces, that gives something to the that has a behirus more than the Nekudas HaSkala. That's the exact words that the Rabbi, that the Maamar are saying.
It's
Okay.
actually
Okay.
or that's experienced in the.
I can't hear you. What'd you say?
Did you hear? What an or that's in it is
Your sound is
experienced
off.
in
Something's
in
wrong with your sound.
Synopsis.
It's hard to.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know what it is. You can't hear me. All right.
And now I hear you lower. We hear you lower.
Okay. We say there's a lichtigkeit by Chochma. We say
When
there's
you
a
say
behirus, a
lichtigkeit, do you mean
lucidity,
behirus?
clarity.
One second. When you say lichtigkeit, are you
No,
talking
I
about the
would
word behirus?
No, I'll start over again.
Behirus means
There's a
lichtigkeit, by the way.
actually a energy.
Hold on.
of
When you say lichtigkeit, it doesn't say it in the Maamar. What word in the Maamar, when you say lichtigkeit, are you referring to? Because I'm confused.
Or
Is lichtigkeit?
yes.
So just use or. It's a little simpler because lichtigkeit means behirus, which is the word he is using here.
Oh, okay. Oh. Okay.
Lichtigkeit
Okay.
is,
So there's
is
an or
clarity.
by Chochma. Yes, sir.
What?
Okay. There's an or by Chochma. Is there a or? Or there's an or, an energy, an or by Chochma. Do we find that same type of idea when it has the Nakudas and Synopsis by Binah, that it has an or also? It's just that the, so to speak, the flavor has changed, or it just comes into greater lucidity?
Every seichel has or. There's no such thing as an idea without or. If you have no or, you have no idea. So every idea has or. Chochma has or. Binah has or. Or is not the operative word here. The operative word here, is it a or atzmi? Is it a or bohir? Is it a or dak? Or is it a or, as he called, dak and ribuy ha'or. Or, all levels have or. Or simply means energy. Every idea has to have or for it to be functional. So the question is, what level of or? So that's what he's saying. There's the difference between the riboy and dakus ha'or, which is stronger in Chochma, and behirus ha'or, clarity, is stronger in the nukudas ha'tamtzis. Anyway, I used examples yesterday. To me, this is getting very
stronger because you've got.
With all respect, this is sounding to me technicalities, mechanics. Why don't you just use an example of an idea that you understand? You conceived of an idea. I gave a very strong example yesterday from the Farbrengen of Simchus Torah Tov Shemem Zayin. If you can ask the question around that example, it'll be a lot easier. You're speaking very abstract. I don't understand the mechanics of it. I understand it practically. Practically, there's a conception that has a tremendous reichkeit, a richness of a concept. That's Chochma. There's understanding it, the details, breaking it down. And then there's coming to the conclusion of it. So we're talking about one idea here that has gone through stages from the beginning of conception to the final steps of comprehension to the summation. And that's what he's comparing. You need an example of an actual idea, and then we can talk, because you're talking now to me in terms, I don't understand the mechanics. Mechanics don't really speak to me. I need to understand it in the example we're using. So take an idea, and there we can dissect it and tell me what are you looking for? You know, I explained at length the truth of an idea, the resonance of an idea. Then there's the mechanics of an idea, the details of an idea. And you need both. If you want to fully internalize, you need Chochma and Binah. Chochma has its values, Binah has its. And then there's the summation, which is comparing the Nakuda at the end of the process, the summary of the idea in contrast to the original point of departure of the idea when it first entered into your consciousness. So which part are you looking to understand?
If you pardon me, let me ask the question this way. If you went off base, if you went off an Araxon, but you came out with a conclusion and a clarity, a lucidity of an idea, even though it didn't fit the kavanah of the Nakuda Saskala, that would be a behirus, but it would be a behirus.
No, it wouldn't be a behirus at all. It would be considered completely off. It would be nothing to do with this Maamar. That's exactly what he's trying to prevent from happening.
I understand.
What that is has nothing to do with this Maamar. That's what you don't want to have.
Yeah, okay. Of course you don't want to have that.
So
But
so
what
why are we
would-
bringing it into it? I mean,
What would be the
he's bringing
difference?
just an example of somebody that started with a truth and then wandered off.
I'd like
I
to
mean,
ask
that's
the
not
question.
relevant. That's what we don't want to have. So
All right, I would
that
like
would-
to, I wanted to ask the question in that kind of contrast, but if not, if I can't answer the question, I'm just going to go back and forth struggling to ask the question. I don't get a chance to finish the question.
you always say that. I don't know what the question is. If you want to ask a
No, I've
question,
never said
ask
that
it.
before. I've never said that before, I don't think, but I'm going to drop the issue. Thank you.
Okay, so we stop here. Does anybody have any other questions on this topic? That's it.
Hello?
Simon.
Yeah. had one-
Okay, go ahead.
Where you said this is from Tafresh Pay Beis? The Maamar?
Yeah, I posted the pages. He says I didn't post them all, but I posted a number of them
No,
on
no.
the group.
I was looking for it in Chabad library. I see a Tafresh Pay Beis and Tafresh Pay Gimel. Say from Maamar.
I don't know what to tell you. Listen, let's deal
Yeah.
with.
I saw it inside. I have this published base, the original, and I saw it. Yeah.
But I'm gonna stop them. I'm gonna stop the recording